We moved into the house on a soft winter morning. It had rained the night before. Everything smelled faintly of damp wood and cold walls, like the house had been asleep for years and was only just beginning to remember how to breathe again. Lan liked it instantly. She said the place felt lived in gently. I wasn't sure what gently meant, but I liked the way sunlight reached the kitchen, even when the clouds were thick. There was a small room at the end of the upstairs hallway. The door was white, chipped, with a faded teddy bear sticker above the handle. Locked, but not firmly, just enough to feel forgotten. We opened it. Inside was a child's room, unmistakably so. Pale blue wallpaper with small cartoon clouds. A wooden crib in the far left corner. Hooks installed lower than they should be. A nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, still plugged in. No dust, no sign of neglect, just empty, as if whatever once lived in it had stepped out quietly and never came back. Lan turned to me and said, "Someone definitely had a child here." I nodded and closed the door without saying anything. The first night passed without incident. The second night, I woke up around 3 a.m., not because of a noise exactly, but because of something softer. A sound like laughter, barely audible, almost like breath, the kind of sound a child makes when hiding under a blanket with a toy, pretending the world isn't real. I sat up. The house was silent. The bedroom door was still closed. I got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. That was when I noticed the faint glow slipping from under the child's room door. It was the nightlight, the one I'd unplugged earlier that day. I moved toward it. As I reached for the handle, I heard it, small footsteps, padded, light, walking in a slow, careful circle inside the room. And beneath it all, the strangest part, no crying. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just stood there, hand inches from the doorknob, breath slow and shallow, as if even the air might break the moment. Behind the door, the whisper stopped, not like a voice being silenced, more like a child noticing they were heard, and suddenly unsure if they were allowed to continue. I walked backward, one step, then another. Carefully, the way you walk in dreams where you aren't supposed to be. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, listening to the walls and the fan and the silence that grew louder every hour. The next morning, Lan asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. My voice was hoarse. She looked at me a little too long, then smiled without asking why. She never asked. Maybe that was why I hadn't told her anything. Maybe she already knew. That afternoon, I stood at the door again, in daylight this time. There was nothing, no sound, no light, just the quiet weight of memory pressing against the wood. I noticed something then, something I hadn't seen before. Scratched faintly into the lower panel of the door, at a child's height, were 4 crooked letters. Good, not carved, just etched. Like a small hand had pressed a pencil into the paint once, waiting for permission, waiting to be praised. I bent down, touched the word, The paint felt warm, like it had remembered the hand. I whispered, almost to no one, "It's okay now," but even I wasn't sure who I said it to, or if it was true. I didn't tell Lan about the voice. I didn't tell her about the footsteps, or the light, or the whispers. She had started sleeping better since we moved in, and I didn't want to change that. But I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 words. I stayed good. They weren't frightening. They weren't angry. They were almost proud, like someone trying very hard to believe they had done the right thing long after it stopped mattering. On the 4th night, I opened the door. The air was still. The nightlight glowed, though I had unplugged it again that morning. Everything in the room looked untouched in a way that felt wrong. The kind of stillness that isn't peaceful, but rehearsed. I stepped inside. The crib was empty, but the mattress had the slightest dip in the center. The mobile above it didn't move, yet I heard something spinning. A quiet, plastic creak, like soft weight turning slowly in circles. The corner bookshelf held 3 children's books. I opened one, inside, in pencil, on the inside cover. Someone had written just a single letter. L. The floor creaked under my foot. I turned. A child's drawing hung behind the door, crayon on faded paper. A house, a stick figure, a sun with one eye, and next to it, in a different color, a smaller figure with no face, just arms outstretched, and a balloon floating away. I looked back at the crib. Something cold pressed through my chest. Not fear, not sadness, recognition, because I had seen that drawing before. It had been tucked in the back of an old family photo album. One Lan never opened. And I remembered asking her once, quietly, "Did you have a sister?" And she had paused, just for a breath, then smiled. "No, not really." And that answer sat heavy for years. It lived in the corner of things she never said. And now I saw it clearly, not a denial, not a lie, but a fracture. Not really is what you say when a presence once filled a room, then slowly faded into silence, until even memory refused to call it by name. Not really is what grief says when it's told to behave. I looked at the crib one last time. The air in the room hadn't shifted, but I felt watched, not in fear, but in waiting. And I thought of the girl with no face, drawn beside the smiling stick figure. I thought about what it means to be almost remembered, almost held, almost loved. And I understood. Someone had stayed here, very still, for a very long time. Someone who learned that being quiet was the only way to be allowed to stay. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights off, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold, listening to the house breathe around me. Old walls do that, shift slightly as they exhale, release warmth they've held for decades, curl at the edges like paper left too long in the sun. But that night, it was too quiet, too still for a place that had once held voices. At 3:14 am, the light came on again inside the child's room. A soft yellow pool seeping out beneath the door, tentative, like it wasn't sure whether it was still allowed to be seen. I didn't go to it. I just stood in the hallway, staring at the glow as it trembled around the frame. That's when the whispering began again. Different this time. No language, just breath, a rhythm. Inhale, small, shaky. Hold, exhale. Inhale, again, like someone rehearsing how to cry, but never letting it happen. Holding it in so tightly, it began to sound like a secret. That sound reached deeper than any scream. It lived in the ribs, in the part of you that knew silence too early. And then I remembered something years ago. A night when Lan stood at the edge of our bed, holding a small white box she wouldn't let me open. It was never mine, she said, so I didn't keep it. And I didn't ask, but the next day, when she was gone to the market, I lifted the lid. Inside was one photograph. Blurry, faded, a little girl, maybe not even 2, standing in a doorway wearing a dress too big, arms hanging awkwardly at her sides, looking at the camera like she didn't know if she was allowed to smile. On the back, in thin blue ink, were 10 words. Lynn, 1 year, 10 months, slept through everything. And now I understood. Lan had never told me about her mother's other child, about the weight of a silence that no one wanted to claim, about the kind of baby that doesn't cry, not because they don't need anything, but because somewhere, someone taught them that needing is the problem. I stepped into the child's room again that night. For the first time, I let the door fully open. The nightlight was already on. The room was warm still. It smelled faintly of dust, lavender, and something older than either. I stood in the doorway and said it soft, steady, like it was long overdue. I'm sorry. Nothing happened. No chill, no wind, no closing door. But the light turned off. Not all at once, not like a bulb dying, but slowly, like someone letting go of a switch they had held for years, afraid it would disappear the moment they moved their hand. And then, no more footsteps, no more quiet laughter, no page turning in the dark. But just before everything fell fully still, in that moment between breath and silence, I heard it for the first and final time. Not a cry, not a wail, just a single, muffled sob, pressed deep into the fabric of memory. The kind that happens when no one is looking. And then nothing. Because even the quietest child eventually learns. No one comes when you never make a sound.